Fuzzy, I want to bring Phil Spencer, put him on the stand. Not literally, virtually, of course. You know, during the Xbox One era, he was on record of saying that he wanted to bring VR to the platform. And when that didn't happen, he was called a liar. He was called a fibber. That the platform was abandoning VR before it even started. That people in the community really wanted VR, and I hear you. I love VR. I work with it 3 and 4 days a week, actually, to literally change my life because of the working out that I do with it. There are plenty of games that I do play on it. There are 2 games coming at the end of the year: the Batman game for the MetaQuest 3, as well as the new Alien game, which looks dope. I'm going to definitely be getting those 2, and I'll be playing them. And I love VR. You love VR. Kay Asante loves VR. I know a lot of people that really dig VR. But I think we can sit back now in 2024 as we roll into August that Phil Spencer was 1,000% correct in not bringing VR to Xbox. It would have been millions of dollars of investment if they created their own hardware. It would have been millions of dollars of investment for their teams to make games for a third-party peripheral. They could have teamed up with MetaQuest. They could have teamed up with any of the big VR headsets out there. But of course, that takes investment for a market that, let's be real here, folks, super niche. Now, February of last year, the PlayStation VR 2.0 released. They made 2 million units, and they shipped 2 million units. They sold about 600,000, which is a fail. Well, we just learned, Fuzzy Belvedere, that got some breaking PlayStation news. That PlayStation VR has dropped by as much as $200 for each one of the packages. Now, of course, there is a $549 bare bones package that literally just comes with the VR headset and the 2 controllers. That originally was $549.99. It is now in places like Walmart, like Target. Specifically, the ad I have in front of me is from Best Buy, $349.99. Now, there is a $400 version, which was $600, that came with the Horizon VR game that was made originally for the launch of this peripheral. What's interesting enough, and again, $349 for me, something that's wired. I'm sorry, when this thing is $100, I'll consider investing. Until it's $100, I'm never going to buy this. One, because all of my PlayStation VR 1 games that I owned at one point, I sold now, were not backwards compatible. And Sony has basically killed all the studios making VR. So, well, there's that. Now, granted, you're going to be able to use this on a PC soon enough. I don't have a PC strong enough to use it. I wouldn't use it for PC. I don't play games on PC. I just don't. Fuzzy, is this basically, does this spell doom for this for a VR 3.0 for Sony? And is this typical, by the book or by the numbers for Sony? When they killed the Vita, they killed the PSP, they killed PlayStation VR 1.0. They killed 2.0, which has now been discounted by $200. You don't hear anything about PlayStation Portable at all. I think it's another bad investment for Sony on a couple of really bad back-to-back years. Let's get your hot take.
I wouldn't say the price cut's the thing that killed it. It was kind of already dying a slow death prior to that. If you look at a combination of things, they were supposed to, this generation, in comparison to the previous one, have more of the first-party studios have different experiences or games. Some of them being, existing games that you can have an experience with it and it's usable, and other games were supposed to be built around this device. The Horizon Climb the Mountain one, or whatever it was called, that was one built around the device. It was basically a tech demo. It was like Astrobot, but for the VR, which by the way, I'm kind of surprised they didn't have an astropod for the VR, but that's another story. Um, and then you had it where you could use it in Gran Turismo, which that was great. That is like the closest you're going to get to like having a racing simulator built in your house. Although you could do the 3 screen deal on a hydraulic rig, but that's going to cost you tens of thousands more to go that route. But it was a awesome accessory for that. But how many people want to spend 550 to experience that on top of, more than likely, to make it worthwhile, having a steering wheel and pedals, also having a racing seat for just one game? Now, I could see if you're also getting like, F1 each and every year that it comes out, and every other racing game under the sun that's multiplat, like your Motorfest and things like that. But if they're not VR compatible, then you're basically spending this extra 500 on top for just one game, which it's great, but not, at least in my opinion, as much as I like GT7, it's not worth the 550 just to have it for that one game. Now, sure, there are plenty other games, but a lot of, if not all of, well, with the exception of, I think, of one of two that they had as like exclusives on the PSVR 2, every last one of the other ones you can get on the Quest 2 or Quest 3. So with that being said, Quest 3 is a better product overall and a little bit cheaper in most cases, except for now with the deep price drop. But it just goes to show that, you know, VR isn't quite ready for mainstream. It's gotten a lot closer, but it still isn't to the point where it's light on your head. The cost is relatively low. Wires are not so cumbersome. I mean, yes, you don't have to worry about wires as much with like the Quest models and things like that, but still, if you are going to do the tethered experience to, go that next level with your PC games and things that are VR compatible, that's great. But when the PSVR 2 finally is allowed to be on PC, it's not going to have a lot of its features, whether it's the haptic feedback in the headband itself or some of the other things as far as the visuals, compared to when it's hooked to a PS5, which there are plenty of people out there with, rigs that are twice as powerful as a PS5 currently, and they're not going to get any of the benefit when it hooks there. Now, I can understand to some extent proprietary stuff, you'd want to make the experience as good as you can on PS5, but I said from get-go it was a mistake to not make it out of the box compatible with PC in the fashion that, would be usable above and beyond their own, platform of games. And if they're still trying to court the PC player, they could get a head start by having it where the PC player buys that VR headset, and then they might wind up picking up, the next, Forbidden West or whatever that is VR centric, not just the climb the mountain one, or the, Gran Turismo 8, where it's, built around being a VR game from get go, where all the interiors are modeled as opposed to just a handful of them and stuff. But yeah, it kind of sucks that it didn't, hit the ground running or have the success that they would have hoped. But it is what it is when it comes to VR at this point. As far as Phil's decision, I think there's more to it behind the scenes between them and Meta or Facebook or however you want to refer to that company at this point. But part of the whole VR vision that I think he had in the past, because it was kind of well known that they had a partnership with them, and it was going to be that some of those Quest models were going to be just basically rebadged Xbox Ones, as far as for use on the console. But for whatever reason, numbers didn't match up, or pricing didn't quite fit the scheme that they were going for, or the coding or programming aspect took a lot longer for games that were not built from the ground up to be a VR game, which that seems to be probably the biggest thing. There's so much that it takes as far as investment building VR games. And if you look at some of them, not picking on the graphical fidelity of the game itself, but they're not on the level that you're used to seeing with your own eyes looking at a TV screen. And it's going to be some time before we truly get there and have it where they're lightweight and where they're low cost and minimal wires. So I think it was probably a good decision to not really push or invest as much into it. Although at this point, Microsoft is a big enough company that they can lean on some of their partners like Meta, like Valve, for example, and things along those lines, or even any of the other 3D headset or VR headsets that were out there, and have it where they can make things compatible. But then you have to take into account how long is that going to delay game production. And we already know publishers want to, push games out the door unfinished and then kind of patch them later. Just imagine them adding that another layer of it being a VR game at the same time. So I think the industry isn't quite there yet when they can get things streamlined, and a VR game takes no longer to make than a standard game, where it can be made simultaneously and not blow the budget out of the water kind of deal. I think that's when it stands a better chance. But like right now, it looks like Sony seems less interested in investing in that and more interested in investing in PC, which, by the way, is probably their best way to get more users on their platform, or at least in their ecosystem, making purchases of games or microtransactions or what have you. The VR space right now, Meta's killing it. And as much as people would be like, well, what about the Vision Pro from Apple? Yeah. When we're talking about when Apple can make the Vision 3 non-pro edition that's for the masses for about $500, because they're not going to lower their price below that on something along those lines, and they still have their Vision Pro 3 or whatever, they'll be 1100 to 1500. That's when maybe we're at that point where it's for the masses and things can be more centered around VR and AR. But until then, Meta Quest 3, I would say by the time the Meta Quest 4 comes out, that will be even another step closer to being ready for the masses, where it'll probably still be the same price. It'll just be smaller, not smaller optics, but smaller device, lighter device, less wires, faster charge, longer battery life, things along those lines. And at that point, I think it will start to grow even further and maybe even cross over into, console gaming, where, hey, you buy the Meta Quest, you hook it to your Series X2 or your PS6 if one exists, and from there you'll be able to experience, almost everything in first person that way. But I don't think studios are that far yet or that close to that yet, and the hardware cost, right, at least at the moment, they're not willing to cut those profits or those margins deep enough to make it that much more viable. But it's a shame to see that PSVR 2 didn't have the success that they had hoped. I was kind of quietly rooting for it, but in that same sense, I was also rooting for them to do more first party stuff that would be VR compatible. Like, imagine being Kratos in a first person perspective from his eyes with the VR headset. The fact that they didn't make that just seems a little off to me, that wasn't a thing that they did. Yep. Or the same thing with Spider-Man. I mean, yeah, you'd probably have a lot of people throwing up like they say they'll do for Indiana Jones. Yeah, swinging from, skyscraper to skyscraper in New York, and you just threw up in your living room. But I'm surprised that they didn't find a way to make it work where they could have those experiences for those games with that headset. To me, that would have been the must have or must buy, apps for that device to make it worthwhile for the $550+ or whatever it was going for at the time. But as of now, I'm still looking at the Quest 3. Don't have it just yet. Bought my sons both a Quest 2, so they're still enjoying those. But they don't play on it every day. They're right. More so on their PC than anything. But it's still it's a worthwhile experience if you have the means to. But the PSVR 2, I don't think was quite as appealing for that price range compared to a Quest 2 or 3 at the time. I think the Quest 3, even though PSVR 2 had better optics versus a library that's twice as large, and optics that aren't too far behind, and has a better, pass through that's in color.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the Quest 3 is the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I know some people talking about the Metro game. Metro game has been announced for the Quest 3 as well. That is also releasing later this year. I know some people were like, yeah, the Quest 3 needs more games. Well, they have 3 big ones coming. Batman, the new Arkham game, which is VR exclusive, which surprisingly enough looks phenomenal. The new Alien game, of course, if you like jump scares. I know Fuzzy would be into that because he likes horror. That game looks dope. And of course, now the Metro game. They have a lot of games releasing, and they also have the one that came with the what the heck's the name of it? Something is Wrath. I actually got that for free with mine. Mrs. Boom bought it for me as well. And that's supposed to be like tip of the spear VR. I haven't played it yet because I've only used my VR for working out. Surprisingly enough, I've played some like silly stuff on there, like Fruit Ninja. I played that on because that's just silly. That's 5 seconds. It's like Beat Saber. Who doesn't play that? That's awesome. But I actually use my MetaQuest 3 strictly for working out, which I did earlier today, and it was freaking amazing as it was 28 weeks ago. But yeah, do you want to add some context?
Well, yeah, like the key thing that people have to understand, the Quest 3 is its own independent device. You don't need a console, you don't need a PC to play those games. They have a library larger than what the PSVR 2 has by far, just on itself. Now, they're not all the games that you might be used to. Now, when you add into a fact that, let's say you have a PC and you have a Steam account or you have an Epic Game Store account, there are a lot of games that are VR compatible. All of those, if you can plug your Quest 2 or Quest 3 into that, can be used for that. So it has a lot more of a library to access than what you can on the PSVR 2. It's just that the PSVR 2 has access to certain exclusives within PlayStation. And if you were to compare library to library, I think the count is less than 5 that you cannot find either on PC and hook your Quest 2 or on the Quest itself in its store. So I would say it's the library, even though the PlayStation one has a decent library, 90% of those games are on the Quest already. So
yeah.